Well, people are very confused a lot of times when they first walk in the door because, you know, the bookstore was here first, so you basically walk in through what is the bookstore. You know, a lot of people look around and say, well, where's the records, you know? And so, you know, we direct them to the other room, which is where most of them are. I started out all used and worked my way into new, and used is primary for me, and new is more secondary. I try to really simulate the old school experience. I mean, I've got sections for every obscure band you can imagine. You know, not just have the records, but I actually have sections for them. You know, so people can, you know, have an easier time of finding something, and also it just kind of signals to people that, you know, we care about the bands that they care about. It's an old building. I think it dates back to the early 1900s. It's an old Masonic lodge, actually. Irvington's, you know, really gone through a transformation. It's always been a nice place to live. The housing stock's awesome. It's one of the earliest suburbs of Indianapolis. So there's all these great old houses, very unique. It's really come into its own. We've got a great pizza place called Giacomo's Pizza, a really nice sit-down restaurant called The Legend. Across the street from us, we now have a new coffee shop. It's kind of a really nice place to live, and it's really laid back. But there's a lot of liveliness to the commercial district now. I think I remember as like 4 or 5 years old, you know, my parents had a little kids record player, and we played this golden record library. And there was one record in there that was the folk record, and I just remember playing that record over and over and over again. Probably the first thing I ever did was do record shows, and that started in the late 70s. And then I worked out a deal with a record shop in Indianapolis, that, like the only used record shop in Indianapolis at the time, was called Second Time Around. It was up in Broad Ripple. And nobody was stocking any of the punk and new wave stuff, so they were all used, and so I worked out a deal with them so I could stock punk and new wave imports and independent stuff. So, you know, back in the early days of The Clash and the Sex Pistols and Devo and stuff like that, you know, that's how I got started. I experienced the full force of the 90s and the 2000s. I started a record store in 1993 called Missing Link Records. It was here till 2008. We moved like 4 times. We, you know, experienced every one of the technological setbacks and the big box, you know, competition from Best Buy and all the stuff that. So we were constantly adapting, and it was very strange. And essentially, we got into the business at the time when it was going downhill, and it's, you know, the trend line was downhill the whole time we were in it, and we just were trying to find ways to adapt and survive. And ultimately, we ended up closing in 2008. And I've been here about 1.5 years. It's kind of an accident how I even actually got back in the record business. In 2012, I started an antique store with my girlfriend. We threw about 1,000 records in the back of the store, and this was about 3 blocks from here. And we found out that the records were what people wanted to buy, and the antiques were kind of, you know, hit or miss. So gradually, I decided that maybe I should just go back fully into the record business. You would think that I would like be mining all my own stuff for stuff like that, but really I just buy good collections. I try to buy good collections. I try to pay really good prices. I don't like to try to cheat people. So I try to get the word out on the street that, you know, if you bring stuff to Irvington Vinyl and it's decent, you know, you're going to get paid well for it. And I just keep trying to, you know, reward people for bringing in good stuff, and it seems to pay off. I went out on a house call about 3 years ago, and this lady was selling her husband's collection, and he died several years before, and I ended up buying it all. And it was the weirdest collection I've bought, probably, because I always tell people I'm looking primarily for rock, soul, and jazz, and there was like none of that in there. There was just a little tiny bit of rock, but it was mostly spoken word and comedy and some other stuff that, you know, I wouldn't necessarily be seeking out. But there were 3 or 4 Jack Kerouac records in there. And there were 2 versions of the first Jack Kerouac record, and I remembered a story that there was something about that, but I couldn't remember the details of it. And when I got home, I researched it and found out that his first record was released on Dot. And what happened was the owner of Dot was very religious and found Jack Kerouac to be incredibly offensive. So somehow the record got past him and got into the production phase. And they mailed out like 125 copies to reviewers and radio stations. And as soon as that happened, he stopped the production and they trashed the entire press run. And he literally tried to track down every one of those copies that got out because he was so upset that they had done this under the Dot label. So at the most, there's like 125 copies that exist, and I found one of those in there. Yeah. So it's really kind of a museum piece in a way. Buy records and buy records, and then when you don't want the records, sell them and then buy more.